Good evening. Welcome to the September 19th, 2009 edition of Reflections on East Granby. My name is Mike Malloy and I'll be your host this evening. Our guest tonight is Frank Negrotti of Bonneview Drive in East Granby. Once again, you can view these shows at Friday night at 8 p.m. on GCTV, channel 16, or you can go to our website, gctv16.org, and go to the View Online prompt and choose the show of your liking. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, Frank.
Good evening, Mike. How's
How are
it
you
going?
tonight? Good. Okay. Once again, my guest name is Frank Negrotti. He lives on Bonneview Drive in East Granby. And you are how old, Frank?
I'm 78.
78, okay. You've lived in East Granby for how long?
Since 1978. October 22nd, 78 is when I moved here.
So 31 years coming
right.
up on. Wow,
That's it.
quite a long time. Okay, we always start out with a little bit about your history. Where were you born, Frank?
I was born in New York City, on the east side of New York. Lived in various neighborhoods there.
Okay.
Little Italy, briefly Italian Harlem, which no longer exists. It's called the Barrio.
Okay.
And right in the heart of the 40s and 50s in the east side of New York.
Quite a place back then, huh?
Well, it was mostly tenements.
Okay.
And it was an odd neighborhood because you were just a couple of blocks away from Sutton Place, a couple of blocks away from Beekman Place, not too far from Tudor City. It was a neighborhood of tremendous contrast, enormous wealth for the time, and people who had very little, hard-working neighborhood, very ethnic in the sense that there were enclaves of Italian, there were enclaves of Germans, Polish and all, but mostly, unlike most of the city, people got along very well there. So it was interesting. The first memories I have of growing up, where I was actually born, then of course there were some problems, and then my mother often fondly remembers New York Foundling Hospital. But I was born on 46th Street, 2nd Avenue,
Right.
which they now have it's called United Nations Park or Plaza.
Okay.
Right around the corner was the Holy Family Catholic Church, which was built. I looked around, but there's absolutely no plaques in my name.
No Frank
commemorating
Negrotti
that.
Square or anything
no,
like that?
No, nothing at all, and I feel very offended.
Okay, well, give it time. You know? Sometimes you got to die first. Okay.
So I lived there, and I still have memories of the Depression, although I personally thought we were very wealthy.
Right.
My mother used to take the rotted vegetables from that were given to her
Right.
by the storekeeper downstairs, and she would cut the stuff away and put the new one. Everybody used to have an ice box then. And on Friday or Saturday nights, and I don't remember which, she would make a huge minestrone. The pot seemed to me the biggest thing in the world.
Right.
And she'd make this huge minestrone, and people would come up. You know, neighborhood people would come up, and my mother would give them a bowl, and people would sit and chat. And I remember you could cut the smoke in the house with a knife.
Yeah? A lot of heavy smokers back then.
A lot of
huh?
heavy smokers. The little Italian cigars were very prevalent. And but I thought that we were very wealthy, and we would get in. Of course, when my mother ran near the end of the pot, somebody would always bring up a bottle of homemade wine.
Right.
And I remember my mother would give, as we ended the pot, she would then serve the soup, but put in a half a glass of wine.
Okay.
The reason for that was that wine enabled you not to eat. It filled you up.
Right,
so
made you feel like
you wouldn't have two bowls of soup. And I thought that we were very wealthy, although the tenement had only one bathroom downstairs for 4 floors, and I think it was three tenants per floor.
Yeah.
But I remember it with fondness, though.
Yeah, it was a happy time.
It was, for me, it was happy.
Yeah. Right.
My father and my mother both came from Italy. My father immigrated into this country in 1904. He was born in 1886.
Okay.
And my mother came immediately after World War I.
Okay.
and she was sent up by the Travelers Aid to meet her family, which was in Boston, the north end of Boston, which my wife and I recently visited the place that she came and lived in for many years.
Really? Wow.
Yes, it was a little back alley called Unity Square, but when you looked out the window, you saw the North Church bell tower.
Wow.
So it was an historic area, and it still is a predominantly Italian area.
Huh.
But I lived in New York all that time, and lived for a while my wife and I, when we got married, we both lived on the east side, and then we went to Flushing, to Kew Gardens, Queens, and then we purchased a co-op in Flushing,
Okay.
which was a convenient neighborhood for me because it was a fast stop back to the old neighborhood on the subway.
Okay. You keep the connection.
And
Stay in touch.
I kept the connection, and at that time there were many, many people still in the neighborhood.
Right.
The neighborhood now has become an extraordinarily wealthy neighborhood with rents that are astronomical.
Okay. Sounds like you were in close proximity to some areas that were developed quite a bit.
Right, right, and they grew out.
Right.
They grew out into the area, and that still is one of the best neighborhoods, I guess, to live in.
Right.
And there's some people that I know who still live there on rent-control housing.
Okay. Yeah. New York's funny like that.
But you're right. Of course, they don't match those $36 a month rents.
No, it's going up a little bit since then.
They bump it up a little.
All right. So your memories in the neighborhood were pretty fond memories growing up in the.
Yeah, basically they were
neighborhood.
pretty good. I went to local schools there.
Right.
One of which is now a United Nations elementary school.
For the kids that are here from other countries? Or
From other countries,
Yeah.
right. And one school which is still there, or it was there the last time I looked, and that was PS 59 or 57th Street. And, from there, I went to high school called Harran High School, and I graduated from there with
Okay.
no honors.
Okay. You graduated.
I graduated, and I went for a very, very brief time to City College in New York.
Okay.
But that was right after my time in the service.
Okay. So you grew up. Okay. So what you served in the military? What branch and?
I served in the Army. I was an infantryman, and I served in Korea.
Okay. Were you
ser-
sent? You were sent to Korea.
I was sent to Korea. You're right. I took my basic in South Carolina, and
Okay.
then very quickly shipped to Korea and served there parts of 52 and parts of 53.
So there was still an active conflict going on.
Yes, it was still an active conflict. I served with a unit that I'm very proud of, the men that I served with, and I still, thank God, see a few of them occasionally, although there's less and less of it.
Right. Yeah.
You know, of us because of the age.
Yep.
And that was a period of my life. After that, I did a couple of little things. Tried to start a ski lodge one time.
Really? Where was that?
That was up in the area of Mount Snow, but
In Vermont.
we failed because there were deed problems and egress problems, and the man who I was partnered with, he lasted out, and he was able to make a go of it. And then the last I heard of him, which was about 25 years ago, he purchased a chain of motels in Florida.
Really?
So he did quite well for himself.
So he
and
sold
I'm
the
glad.
resort?
Yeah, very interesting.
Now, let me ask you a question. You come home from the military. Where do you go? When do you come? You got out, you were discharged?
Yeah, I was. I was separated in those days. I don't know about now, but in those days, I think you had to pull 7 years or something, and then
Okay.
you got your discharge. But I was given my DT 214, which is on record over here at the town hall.
Right.
And
So that means you're free to go unless they need you.
yes,
Is that the way they did it? Yeah.
I believe you served 6 more years in the inactive reserve.
Okay.
And that's what happened. My last days in the military were spent on Fort J, which was Governor's Island, which was a ferry ride at the tip of southern Manhattan.
Okay.
Yes, and it was my...
Could see the whole home from there, or pretty close?
No, I couldn't see home, but I could see into the old neighborhood.
Yeah,
Of course, you had to look through Wall Street and all
That's
of
a
that.
big wall there. So you come home, and had you met your wife yet, or were you? Okay.
No. I was served as
Still single.
I was a bachelor about town, for
Right.
lack of a better word, and
Yeah.
I had many friends in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was still, there were many of the men that I had served with came from the neighborhood.
Right.
We had a very good time. Just a fabulous
How old were you at this
neighborhood
point?
to go on. I must have been at the 23.
Okay, so good time.
So
to be.
for 23, we just had a good time, and then I went to work for American Airlines. I worked in the cargo.
I just want to
department.
touch one thing real quick. You come home from the military, you go back to New York, you're free to do what you want. How do you get an idea to start a ski resort? That just where did that come from?
No, it wasn't my idea.
Oh, okay. So
I
you.
possibly have never had an original idea.
No, I find that hard to believe. But, okay.
But anyway,
So you're roaming around. You're unemployed at the time, or
yeah, well, temporarily
Okay.
I was unemployed.
somebody comes up with an idea to start a ski resort.
A ski lodge. And
ski lodge, okay.
My friend had a piece of property up there near
Okay.
Wilmington, except the property was without egress, and because of, I guess, timber laws at that time, I'm not quite sure, but I know we got involved into a pretty much of a mess, and he stuck it out, and I was unable to. I just didn't have any money to do so.
Yeah, no, I just had to touch on that because that's a pretty unique little
Right.
sidetrack. But so you come back to New York and you get a job with American Airlines?
With American Airlines,
Okay.
right. And I had a job with American, and at that time we went through periods of layoffs and all.
Mm-hmm.
And American also gave us passes to fly, you know.
Yeah.
And,
You mentioned that when I talked to you previously.
yes, I very much enjoyed flying.
Yeah.
I went domestically. We used to only go to Mexico. And then eventually they came in with passes that you can go on other airlines.
Wow.
You know, you had special discounts.
Yeah.
And then there was a magic period of time that Icelandic Airlines started, and they were giving round-trip passes for $20 to 3 destinations at that time. They were Bergens in Norway, Stockholm in Sweden, Helsinki in Finland, and then, of course, to Denmark.
Okay.
And I met a few female acquaintances.
I bet, yeah.
And we flew back and forth like it was nothing, and we had a very
It's
nice...
like shooting down to the Jersey Shore for you,
Sure,
right? Jump on the
It was
plane.
and they were in the old Electras, too.
Okay.
And there was a period of time where the Electra wings were falling off in the air, but
Yeah.
it turned out to be one company in particular requested that the undercarriage be removed to save that 440 pounds. And later on, that airplane was so dependable when that undercarriage restored
Right.
that it was used for years by the Weather Bureau as a hurricane hunter
No kidding.
aircraft. That's how sturdy it was.
So it's just
It
a
was a
design
prop
flaw.
jet.
That, yeah.
And so I flew back and forth quite a few times. I went to Italy quite a few times.
That's quite a place to be, though. A young guy with basically a ticket to the world. You know,
Yes,
you could fly.
exactly.
That's great.
I was in no hurry to get married
No. Okay.
at that time.
All right. So you're flying back and forth to Europe. What do you remember of Europe in those days? I mean,
Well, first of all, the American dollar was king. Americans were, with the exception possibly of France, Americans were really well liked everywhere.
were they? Okay.
Yeah, they were well liked in places like Denmark, Norway, Finland. Americans were very well liked.
Right.
In Sweden, there was a bit of standoffish.
Okay.
And,
Just the cultural differences.
cultural, whatever. I think the part that Sweden played in World War II maybe was on their conscience of some people, because as soon as I got a wisecrack against Americans, I would remind them that, you know, whose side they really supported.
Right. Yeah, they'd
And,
made kind of a
yeah,
convenient deal. To
yes,
keep
of course, they were greasing the troop trains of the Germans
Right.
on a way to go to Finland. And what happened was that, but
little historical.
there was no problem getting along with the girls, though.
No, well,
No, at that time. And I enjoyed, I want to say something, I enjoyed my bachelorhood.
Yeah, that's great.
And
yeah.
Back in 1960, strictly through an accidental trip that my wife took, I met my wife.
Wow.
And we both speak Italian. Italian has massive amounts of dialect, which most people now use the real Italian, but
Right.
suddenly we spoke the same dialect. And,
Interesting.
from there, we grew into a friendship, and from there into a romance. And in 1962, we were married.
Great.
And her name, her maiden name, was Deanna Ramponi.
Mm-hmm.
And marrying her was probably the best thing I ever did. We have one child.
Okay.
And we have one granddaughter.
And what's your daughter's name?
My daughter's name is Linda, and she's married into the Drake family of Windsor.
Okay.
So, she is, we're very proud of her that she's done well for herself.
Good for her. So you had quite a history at American Airlines. You worked there from the 50s right up to
42 years when I finally left.
Yeah.
But most of the time, towards the last, both when I was in New York, I was highly active in union affairs.
Okay.
Although I went into management very briefly, and it just wasn't my lifestyle. Then when I came up here, I was quite a few years. I ran the union up here, and I became involved in the Transport Workers International.
Right.
And then I started.
So you're still an active employee of the airlines. You're just an elected head of the union, or did you leave?
Yeah, you're an active. That's the way our union is set up. Until you get into the international, they have only one president.
Okay.
Of each local, and depending on the size of the local, that president may work. In the case of our local, our president was always down in New York, always in Queens, which was between the two major airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy. And in fact, I worked at Kennedy Airport when it was called Idlewild.
Okay.
And essentially, when we first started, when I first went there, there were a series of gigantic Quonset huts. Yeah, that's right. And
like a military base.
It was almost, and they had some decent restaurants there, and there was such an excitement about flying. People would fly with suit and ties, women with fur coats. Flying was strictly very glamorous.
Right.
And as employees, we were requested to have a good sport coat, so always a tie.
Very professional.
Very professional. Always encouraged, especially if you flew first class, never to tell people where you worked. That you worked for the company, so they wouldn't feel that they're sitting next to someone, or
Right. They were selling an image in some ways.
Image,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the company was very successful, and I'm very proud of American Airlines. They did well, and outside of some periods of layoffs and all, I never really missed a paycheck from them.
Interesting.
I was a crew chief and an instructor at the airline.
So let me ask you a question. What did you actually do? What was your job? What was your, I know you were the union.
My job with American Airlines, I was always a crew chief there.
Okay.
Would be, number one, in the morning, if you had that shift, you made sure that all the equipment was gassed up, running in proper position by the first outbound. So as soon as the crew came in, generally at 5:30, that's when your passengers arrived. The belts were turned on, bags were in. By say a flight went out at 6:30. By 5:45, you had the mail. Your freight was up. You'd sometimes have to go down. Our freight warehouse was always busy at those days. Our mail was tremendous. The average flight would always go out with several thousand pounds of mail.
Wow.
And it was a pretty effective system, and the flight would go out, and the company was very conscientious about having flights out on time and, trying to arrive as close to arrival times at their destination. And that can only be accomplished by the flight departing on time as it should.
So your job is to just make sure everything's where it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be.
Right, and direct. There's always problems come
Right.
up, and as a crew chief, you made those decisions. The problems, when the decisions were too big, then you refer to a supervisor.
Okay.
But most of the time, especially with the senior crew chiefs, they generally knew what the answers to the problem were.
Right, so you're like a field coach, make sure everything goes well.
Exactly,
Yeah.
everything went well. Then, of course, I had, again, during the last few years here, I had a lot of union work.
Right.
And my position was finally, I left about a year or so before I retired, simply to give the man who was going to take my place, to give him the benefit of my advice. He was an intelligent young man, and he came out of the Kennedy era, which was a very pro-union shop.
Right.
So he knew the contract and all, but just some general advice on how to handle things. And I still handle some things like getting unemployment pay, the circumstances a man left by,
Right.
grievances.
So you're still involved with American?
No,
Oh.
no, I only in the very loosest way.
Okay.
The current president was the man who took over my job as the running this station.
Okay.
And he's now the president of the local, and he's done very, very well in an extraordinarily trying time for the
Imagine
airlines.
as an airlines, yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it's unbelievable. Things that my company will do will judge how much fuel on a plane, how much the weather is. I mean,
Right.
they've gotten it down so that they may get from one area to the other to buy the fuel that they need for maybe a slightly cheaper price.
It's all micromanagement at this point, just to try to
yes,
stay in business.
and
yeah.
wouldn't be possible without the computers that we have.
Right.
American Airlines pioneered the Sabre system of computers, which was probably the most powerful computers that there were. Many people said next to the Air Force's computers, but they did a good job of it, and they're still doing a good job of it. But they've had terrible times for the last few years.
Yeah, it's been a tough time all around, especially airlines have been struggling for 10 or 15
a lot of
years.
men, a lot of men are out of work now.
Yeah.
A lot of men are part-time. That part-time work is it's sometimes the only job that you can get.
Right. So you leave, you move up to Bradley, as you're transferred to Bradley.
Yeah,
and
well,
how do you end up?
how I transferred to Bradley was pretty simple. I lost 4 cars 5 times stolen from me in 5 years.
Really?
Now, when I lived in the east side of New York, I had nothing stolen from
Okay.
me. That was supposed to be really a bad neighborhood.
Right.
But here I am in Flushing by some nice co-ops, and I had 4 automobiles stolen 5 times. That means that they were they were returned to me, but then stolen again.
They were just borrowing them at that point.
That was the point, and they were gone. And as a matter of fact, one time we had one stolen, and the policeman came up to how a very sharp New York City cop.
Yeah.
He knew that the paint job didn't match the car, which was a Pontiac of that year.
Wrong shade.
The wrong shade, and he went down and he found the real, because they have secret places to look.
Right.
And he found the person who stole the car.
Yep.
And his wife had the car, and when she went before the grand jury, she was so neatly dressed and so neat, and had her son with her because he didn't want to leave his son, and he looked like he was a sparkling little boy.
Right, ready for
and
church.
they said, no, this woman could have nothing. Her husband was actually a professional car thief.
Oh, no kidding.
So I want to know, was good to know, though, that he only lived 6 or 7 blocks from me.
So it got old.
Yes, it got old, and then the clincher was one midnight mass. getting dressed for midnight mass. And we, as traditionally, you always put on your best. And
Right.
I went to put on my jewelry and all that. When we went into the drawer to find it, it was gone.
Oh, okay.
And so I saw a transfer come up. I really wanted to go to Providence.
Those were tough days for New York, though. There was a
Yeah.
lot of
Oh,
yeah.
at that time, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Not many people know that. The mid-'60s to the mid-'70s were
Yeah.
a period of intense crime in New York.
Right, right.
My mother was a cleaning woman, and on 500 Fifth Avenue, that's just north of the public library, opposite across the street.
Right.
You know, the famous New York Public Library
Sure.
with the lions on it. And several of these women would walk home. And I like to tell a little story on
Yeah,
my
sure.
mother, too. When they would go walking home, one of them, then my mother would peel off and the others would as they were going home. And she was walking down, I believe it was 60th or 61st Street, right at 59th Street Bridge, and she lived right around the corner on First Avenue. And some criminal put a knife into her heart, just to rob her purse, and killed her. And oddly enough, while my mother and the rest of the cleaning women were, women of age, they worked hard their whole life.
Right.
There was no glamour in their lives. This woman happened to be a very lovely young woman whose husband was training to be a waiter at the Palm restaurant. And if you're familiar with New York, the Palm is still, today it's spread out to other towns, but the Palm was one of the premier restaurants in New York. Of course, he took his wife's body and he went back home to Italy and never came back again with his daughter. He had a daughter. So, but my mother, she became a citizen somewhere around I would have to say 6 years after I was born. And I still remember she was with a group of women that they all studied together. And they would study for their citizenship. And when they became citizens, with people we had absolutely nothing, we threw one heck of a party. All those women, the wine flowed, the food was available because they became citizens.
Plenty of minestrone.
It was minestrone, prosciutto. There was
Right.
the braised pork chops, everything.
I'm getting hungry.
It was, and I just say that by how emotional a time it was
a big
to
event.
be a big,
Sure.
big event. Meant of enormous pride.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So you made the transition. You said Providence was
what I wanted to go, but they never.
Right.
There were two openings and they never posted it.
Okay.
I never saw it on a board, and so I came to Bradley, and
Right.
I stood here. When I arrived here, Mike,
Yeah.
I was recommending anybody I knew had 6 months to live to please move up here to make it seem like a lifetime. It was unbelievable.
Right.
But actually, and then a year later, we lived in the Bradley Apartments in Windsor Locks, and then we bought this house. A little house. We purchased a small one because we knew they'd be easy to get rid of because we couldn't picture ourselves staying here.
Right.
And the next thing you know, time is here.
31 years later.
Later, and I'm over here now.
Okay, so you're looking around. Was it the price of the house? What was it about East Granby? It was obviously convenient to the airport, but what was your first impression of it?
At the time, I wanted to live in Windsor Locks.
Okay.
And but Finest had moved all their people for town famous for clams. I can't think of the name of it. Up in Massachusetts at the warehouse.
Gloucester?
Not Gloucester.
Bedford? I don't know.
Ipswich. Ipswich clams, right. Anyway, they moved everybody down here, those who wanted to come.
Okay.
And you couldn't buy a house in Windsor Locks.
They bought up all the housing
They bought
stock.
up all the houses. So we looked around. So we saw that there were houses in Simsbury.
Right.
But I like Windsor Locks. It was near the airport. And of course, I missed the fact there's no subway to the airport. But besides that, I turned around.
A little culture shock.
A little culture shock, but we were very close.
Yeah.
My wife worked at various places around here, and
Right.
we came here. Then my mother was getting much older, and she still lived on the east side. Then she moved up to a place that we had in Westchester County.
Okay.
Like all good Italians, we had an apartment in the city and a place in the country.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
anyway, the place in the country turned out to be they call it Horse Westchester, North Salem.
Nice place.
And very, very nice place. But it was too much. It was 60 miles to the airport.
Okay.
It was just too far to commute to the city. So then I built a small apartment in the little house that we had. And because we had a walkout garage and it was a walkout level in the back, it was below, grade level.
Right.
And it was faced the south, so there was a lot of sunshine and all. I took all these factors, super insulated, and made an apartment where she lived with us for a few years. And
Beautiful.
then she passed away, and, and the natural function of time and place. And,
Yeah. So you got to spend some good time.
Time, yes. It was a very pleasant time. My mother was there. She loved her grandchild. And it was good for us as a family. And
Right.
we now use the apartment for our guests. Once in a what do I mean by guests? I have friends of mine will drop in from Oklahoma on their way up from Florida to go
Right.
to Boston.
Yeah.
Guys from mostly guys sometimes with their wives up from New York or New York State.
It's great to have a guest room.
Yeah, it's good. We have a place. One very, very good friend of mine, my fishing partner, he lives in Delaware County. He was the former police commissioner of the town of Long Beach in Long Island. He worked himself up from I'm very proud of him. He worked himself up from a cop to a police commissioner.
Good for him.
And he one time came up with his wife and all, and they stood with us a week, and all we ever heard was the slamming of the door in and out.
Oh,
and
really?
They enjoyed the area.
Right,
and then
right.
finally one evening we had dinner with them. But, it's that
was a
that
good stop.
convenient. No, I never rented the place, although I've had many, many requests from my neighbors to rent out the place to their mother or to something. We never rented it. It's a one-family area. Thing, even though I'm listed as a two-family house. I
Really?
don't quite understand that.
Yeah.
But that's it. The only person I had staying with me for any extended time was my cousin Steve Vitti, who lives now over in the condos down in right around the corner from me.
Okay. So you roll into East Granby. What was your first impression?
Well, at that time, East Granby was more rural. I always liked to hunt.
Right.
So I used to go up. There was the side of the Metacomet Trail going south. I couldn't believe the partridge hunting up that way.
Okay.
And I love to fish. And I noticed I found these farm ponds between here and Windsor and all. They were loaded with bass, and the fishing was terrific. And then, of course, I discovered the Connecticut River,
Right.
which is still to this very day an untapped resource
Yeah. It's
for
beautiful.
anglers. And,
Right.
and I'm surprised there isn't a scenic trip that goes between, say, Hartford and Old Saybrook and back again. It's so beautiful.
It is, yeah.
But of course, at the time we moved up here, it was still being called the longest sewer in America.
It was, yeah.
But the states and the federal government have done a wonderful job to clean up the standards. They've also made diversion areas so we don't have that flooding that we have.
Just the sewage treatment plants alone and all the...
Of course.
all the,
they just did a magnificent
population.
job, and I think the job is going to continue.
Well, yeah. I think that the even in the Farmington Valley, it's starting to stretch up this way, that there's a real focus on protecting.
That is the little gem, the Farmington River.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
Right from Massachusetts all the way down. It's just just a hidden wonder. It's just wonderful. There's sections of it that people don't ever see even.
Right.
And
It's good to get in a canoe and go down it. It's
Oh,
amazing.
it is,
It's a
it
completely
is.
different perspective. It's like riding a train. You see the back
Exactly.
sides of the buildings. Well, when you go down the river, you see all the farms and stuff. It's different.
You're right.
You don't realize it's even there.
Losses of farms in East Granby today, and the losses of agricultural land is I think, an unpleasant part of it.
Mm.
You see that we have box warehouses on the way in, and some of them in Windsor locks. I don't know what the solution to it is. So it's unfortunate, in my way of thinking, that unfortunately they're warehouses.
Right.
And they're not manufacturing centers. They're
Right.
not places that make anything.
Right.
And that seems to be a problem in all our country.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
It really is. It's
It's,
one of many.
Exactly right.
So when you first came into town, you looked in Simsbury. It was a little too far from the airport. Was that primarily what?
Right, no,
Yeah.
and the houses were a bit high, and now had I known I was going to stay here all that time, I would have certainly bought down there because they were bigger homes.
Right.
But we decided to be a little bit smart about it, and we
Yeah.
bought this very small house.
Considered it a starter home.
Considered
Yeah.
a starter home. But remember, we're people who lived in apartments all our lives.
Yeah,
So
right,
it,
right.
it seemed like it was huge to us. But we knew we would get rid of that in a manner of speaking,
Right.
at the snap of a finger.
What was when you drive into town? When you first moved in here? What was your first impression of the neighborhood, your neighbors?
Well, my first impression of neighbors, Deanna and I, when we lived on the east side,
Yeah.
and even in Flushing, when we moved in, people came up with coffee,
Right.
beer, sandwiches, always something the men gave you a hand to move in if you were moving yourself.
Right.
And here, we moved in, and nobody looked at us.
Yeah, it was different.
And,
time.
it
Yeah.
was absolutely different. Then now I attribute it that it's being New England, when you mind your business.
That's a good. Yeah.
But no, we missed that.
Yeah. It's a sense of community.
And then when I drove around, and no people were ever walking the street.
Right.
How can you not walk the street? How can you not sit on your stoop? I mean, it was completely
Culture shock
different.
for Frank.
I mean, at last, the guy diagonally across the street from me at that time came from the Midwest. We became fast friends. He was a very young guy,
Right.
in his 20s. And we'd sit down on our stoops and we'd have a couple of beers. I don't know how well it's set in the neighborhood, but we would sit down after work and we would go fishing together and all that. And I was very glad that he was there.
Yeah.
And then as I used to tell my wife, I saw it down, and the joke became, well, what happened today? I got 2 nods.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I said, then it would be, I got a half wave.
It's funny you say that because I think things might have changed a little bit because people are a little bit more friendly today. I don't know if it was just the time that you moved in where people were just real busy.
You're right,
Yeah.
right.
A
And
more private time, or
then again, my job was odd. Plus that, I have to say something about my job. I made a very good living there, but I worked tons of overtime.
okay, right,
That was a heavy overtime job.
Right.
Why things always go wrong with the airplanes.
right,
And a plane that should come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon wasn't scheduled in until it was 5:15 when the peak period was starting, so there was
Right.
overtime. But anyhow, I had that impression. I had the impression of a section that was still rural. There were still cows around.
right,
It was places that I wandered through because my email is Woodwalker14,
right.
and that was given to me by my daughter because I always like to walk around in the woods, and I
Yeah.
walk around in the woods with a guidebook. I like to
No
pick
shortage of
mushrooms.
trails and kind of areas you can kind of set off in around here.
No,
Yeah.
except for the main trail, the Metacomet up there.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I said there's no shortage of them.
Oh,
a
there's
lot of
no
little,
shortage.
Yeah.
There's places you think, game trails that you
Yeah.
could follow. There were
Farms.
very few deer around here when I first came here.
Yeah.
Very, very few. And now they're a blight. There's
Right.
much too much.
Right. So you're making your way through East Granby. Now you started in a. Was your daughter raised here?
My daughter was raised here,
well, I
went
guess
to
she
the
would've-
local high school it was, I don't think that happy an experience for her, but the high school did educate her very well.
Right.
And she's never had any problem getting a job or doing a job.
Right. So so you put your daughter through school here. You're living here now. When did you start to? Because you're pretty involved now in some of the town activities.
Well,
I've met you through that.
First of all, I met you through our Democratic
Town committee
yep. Meetings. I've been a lifelong Democrat.
Right.
I did fool around.
Let me just pause for one. Well, let me pause for one second. You told me an interesting story when you first. You were driving by and you were looking for the Democratic Party and there was a storefront. Why don't you just recant that?
Yes.
That was
when I first moved here,
right.
I was looking for when I noticed Democratic Party headquarters.
Okay.
A sign.
Yep.
So I pulled in, and there was one individual there.
Right.
This is in the area that is now JG's, I believe. I may
Okay.
be wrong, but
Yeah.
I believe JG's was in that section there.
Okay.
So I walked in and I talked to the man. I don't know who he was, and I said, "Are you a Democratic town
Right.
committee?" He says, "Yeah." So, I told you before, I was making pretty good. So I gave him $25. He didn't know what to do with the $25. Yeah, it was no collection.
First donation ever.
The first, I guess
It's
so.
a very Republican town back then.
Town, of course. And I mean, the whole place was, holy God, very Republican.
Yeah.
But we had a wonderful man as a first selectman, Frank Rothammer. I don't know if I met Frank
quite a
very much.
reputation.
I liked him, and he had a wonderful reputation, I think, anyway. But no, there was no effective. And my background, I was always a Democrat, except for a small period of time.
I'm going to say.
Where on my friend's kitchen table, one of the places, and I would say one of the main one, where the Conservative Party started. New York State was one of two states that has a Conservative Party, which is ultra-Republican. It was started, and that was over the school busing issue.
Okay.
And I saw citizens that were upset at what they considered the destruction of their neighborhoods and all. They had some pretty valid points.
Right.
And I admired, but slowly and surely, within a matter of weeks, I started to see for the want of a better word, the anti-Americans. I'm not going to even say what I like, the fringe loonies going out there.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw this particular friend of mine espousing the philosophy of these people. For God's sakes, they were really. There were people who were they were sorry they didn't have a wagon train to surround themselves in and shoot at the Indians. I don't know what to say.
Right.
I mean, these people were incredible. And then that ended my brief romance with conservatism.
Yeah, okay. So.
And since then I have voted Democratic.
Yeah. So you're here, but since then you've gotten involved with. Let me ask you a few of the questions I ask a lot of the guests. Now, you've been in East Granby for 30 years. Is there anything that because you have quite a different perspective coming from the big city to a fairly rural town and seeing the development. Is there anything you would change in the history that you've been here? Anything that you think could have been done differently? This is always a question I preface by saying, knowing hindsight's 20/20. But I always try to get like a perspective of, was there anything that you would have changed that didn't happen a certain way, or any advice you could give based on your experience here?
I would say from the many repairs to our schools over time, that the repairs should have been of top quality that would lasted us into the future. Another thing too, in the development of the new houses around this area, some of them, like the one right around the corner from me, I can't think of the name of it. It's not Chelsea Commons, right next to it.
Okay. Yeah.
They have adequate room. There's room between the houses. Some of these places that they built up near the center of town, for God's sakes, they're huge houses and they're too close together.
Right.
It would have been better that the builder sacrificed a couple of his acres and spread them out a little bit better, and maintain the airiness of the town, more of a rural character, and the fact that they're all built with one painting, with one paint job on them.
I think anytime you see that, and I've noticed that the different towns I've lived in, anytime you see an open space go away, it's troubling.
It's troubling. Very
it's
troubling.
human nature, or whatever you want. I think overall, progress is progress. But I think there's something that kind of is universal in the sense that when something's paved or something's built in a place where you used to be able to see trees and open space, and there's to be fair, there's quite a movement in Connecticut to protect open space. There's been a lot of money spent. A lot of farm rights have been bought, and it's a challenge in any town, including East Granby.
Oh yes, and the late Paul Newman with his fight for Trout Valley, which I've never been to, but I understand is absolutely a beautiful place, and they were able to save that. Some of the things, though, are disturbing to me. Down on Seymour Road, when you go down there, I see these big box warehouses.
Right.
I don't know even what their employment is in these warehouses.
Right.
I see one of them is a Federal Express, but I don't know if they brought jobs to the area.
Right.
And if they did bring jobs to the area, did they try to solicit locally?
Right.
I don't see the sense that we make anything out of this area now. They're talking about the end of Spoonville Road.
Right.
There's a...
On Seymour.
On Seymour, and the end of Seymour, right. That vast area, which is really a unique area. Part of it was all farmland and growing productive. There's a big swampy area in the back there, which I've seen wood duck flying in and out of there. There's a light airplane that's still crashed in there.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
There's all the plants are growing through it,
Interesting.
the motor is gone. Of course, you're not supposed, it's private property.
Yeah, right.
But, a mushroom picker goes anywhere. Anyway, but now I belong to the Land Trust, and I'm just amazed at the quality of people that they have in this organization.
Some real classy folks.
Yeah, Ian Clark, Jane Doob, just so many. Tom Howard, who I know is a friend of yours. Just people of such tremendous quality and ability. The only thing that keeps me from not being even more active in it is the fact that most of the time I'm going.
Yeah, that's an interesting. You travel a lot. So
I travel a lot. Yeah, right. We recently went to a wedding at the Sturbridge, Massachusetts. But the wedding was held on a town where they have a festival in my father's hometown that I go to every year.
Okay.
And
in Italy.
In Italy, yeah.
Wow.
It's up in the high mountain. It's about by road about an hour and a half from Switzerland.
Okay.
And it's the festival of the Festival di Patata, Festival of Potatoes.
Oh.
And what are Italian people doing with these potatoes? But they served the traditional fare of northern Italy, polenta with the cacciatoris, which is everything. They truly, all the people there, they hunt the wild pigs,
Yeah, wow.
They make hams out of them. They're well used.
Good food.
Good food, right. Very good food.
It's worth the trip, isn't it?
Well, that, and then we go around the rest of it. You could be in Italy 1,000 years, and I think you'll only scratch. It's like trying to go to Rome for 2 days.
It's a lot of people's favorite destination.
Yeah.
From people who've traveled a lot.
Well, my wife and I love Rome.
Right.
What we've seen of Rome is nothing to what's still there.
Yeah.
It's...
Paris is like that. I've been there twice.
Oh, yeah.
You walk through and you feel like every street corner, or any of the big European cities, you feel every street corner is a museum. Especially as an American, where there's a lot of interesting things, but the history there has been ingrained more, in terms of architecture even.
I like London very much.
Right.
We've always enjoyed London. I think the City Museum of London and London Museum, I think, are two of the fabulous places. The town is a true melting pot. People, they're from India, Jamaica, the Barbados, any place that was a British protectorate at one time. And I think that London is a city that takes a long to think when you're there that you've scratched the surface, but actually you think you've seen a lot, but actually you've scratched the surface.
Now that I think of it, in some ways you could say that about New York. I mean, Manhattan, you could spend your whole lifetime finding little...
I was very proud that
treasures,
very few people knew Manhattan like I did.
Right.
Because I was always interested in going somewhere.
Yeah.
And I was, thank God, a couple of the men that I, grew up with, they were interested. And so we would always take these trips and these visit. We'd read about exhibitions or a site that was being excavated, and we'd go down there and see it.
You went from being the Manhattan walker to the wood walker. So you found a challenge everywhere.
But I love New York and the restaurants.
Sounds like you're just a very curious individual, Frank.
Yeah, I am.
Inquisitive.
Well, in a way, I guess I am.
So when you're just ask you a few quick questions because our time's running short. But if you were, and this is an interesting question for somebody like yourself, if you had one wish for East Granby, what would it be?
If I had for one wish for East Granby, that some of the areas that are being taken now would be saved for as wild areas, as open areas, open space. For instance, I think that area at the end of down there at Melody Lane, that property.
Right. Yeah.
I think a place like that saved. I think it's with its swamp preserve, with its open land preserve. What a place for a baseball field. What a place for a football field.
Right.
Place for a little stadium. And that's near the road with room, tons of room for parking. And the rest of the place kept as it's intended to be. The fields converted to sorghum and something else that would attract birds and wildlife.
Pretty consistent theme with you. Really support conservation of open space.
I do.
Nature.
I do, absolutely.
You've gotten a lot of pleasure from it yourself.
I'm one of the few people who would gladly pay a surcharge in my taxes, realizing that many people can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
It's one of the advantages of having a small
house and a reasonably good retirement, right?
That's
you can
right.
enjoy it. Right?
I can.
Smart way to go. If you were to give advice, this is one of my favorite questions. If you were going to give advice to a young person without any restrictions on what that advice would be about, what would it be?
Advice to a young person?
Like, say, your grandchild or anybody. You've got a few years under your belt, quite a bit of experience.
Here's what I'd say to him.
Okay.
As a very young man, still in high school,
right,
I would advise him to learn a basic trade.
Okay.
Electrical, mechanical, plumbing.
Right.
One of those. Basically learn that. But having learned it and becoming good at it,
right,
applying themselves to it,
right,
possibly even during the summer, hiring out for low or no wages to a licensed man,
right,
becoming, in a sense, a journeyman.
Right.
I would advise him to do that, and then, with all your credits intact,
right,
try for the best college that you can try for.
Okay.
And
interesting. Yeah.
The reason for that is that while the college education, there's certain areas like medicine and all that, even medical.
Right.
There's places where right now there's a shortage of nurses and shortage of things. But 2 or 3 years ago there wasn't that shortage.
Right.
Something that a man could always say, if I want to, I can fall back on it.
Right.
Something that he can hold. I'm a great believer in do your traveling, do your wandering, do the things you want to do. Have your experiences in life.
Right.
And have them without hurting anyone. But make yourself a more expansive purpose.
Right.
do better for yourself in that you have some practical knowledge as well as the knowledge that education will bring you.
Okay.
This way here, a man may end up being in sales for a large company, or a person
Right.
who analyzes potential mergers or anything else.
Right.
But he also has a set value in what he knows.
Tangible trade.
A tangible trade, a set value in what he knows, more than a tangible trade.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think, if anything, one other thing that it's to segue on what you're talking about, is I find that I've worked in blue-collar profession most of my life, and despite my interest in other issues and learning and et cetera, there's something that you have to understand. It's kind of like growing up on a farm, or growing up. You have to, once you've used your hands and you've engaged in some sort of manual labor of some sort, it's something that never leaves you. It gives you a grounded sense, and I think maybe that's kind of
That's
in a viable trade.
And a viable trade, but once you learn to lay cement block or brick, you always know how to lay the cement block. Once you learn how to analyze the soils for a foundation, you can be the contractor of a foundation.
Right.
But you have to know it. You have to know it right. Otherwise, you become a stumbler that builds a rotten foundation.
Right.
It doesn't do anything for you. So become a great executive. Become one of those magical people that earns obscene amounts of money, but know something in the back that you can do with it.
Fall back on.
And that's for the ordinary man.
Yeah, gives you confidence.
If you're born in the right family, you're destined for Choate School and Yale.
Yeah,
well, maybe you don't have to learn anything.
I think a few of them could.
Yeah, they probably could too.
Could use a bit of that. Anyway, well, with that, Frank, I guess we'll have to wrap it up. I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story, and it's one more to put in our catalog, and it's been a pleasure. I've been trying to get Frank in here for a while because I enjoy talking to him.
Well, I always enjoy your company, Mike.
But B, he's just got a unique perspective and quite a character, Frank. Thank you.
Take care, Mike.
All right. With that, we'll end our episode tonight. And once again, a reminder, you can view this show Reflections on East Granby on Friday nights at 8 p.m. and with a repeat on Saturday morning. You can also pull it up anytime you like on the web on gctv16.org, along with several other programs that are produced regularly. And if you're so inclined, we encourage you to consider volunteering to help tape some of these shows, or tape some of our town shows in East Granby or Heartland, and expand this service. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Good night.